Now it is my enormous pleasure to introduce Gil Penalosa, our roundup speaker for today. Simply put, Gil Penalosa has transformed cities all over the world by energetically and insistently making cities open for pedestrians and bicyclists instead of automobiles. In the process, he has facilitated the reimagination of the purpose of city streets as conduits of recreation, connection, sociability, rather than just vehicles and traffic. Gil Penalosa was Commissioner of Parks, Sport, and Recreation for the City of Bogota, Colombia from 1995 to 98, and he oversaw the design and development of 200 new parks throughout the city, mostly in low-income areas that had long been neglected by city government. He also put in place a permanent system of ciclovias, where vehicular streets were taken over by pedestrian joggers, bicyclists, and skaters on Sunday, a program that is now adopted worldwide as Sunday Streets. Penalosa followed his work in Bogota with a highly energetic career as an advocate and strategist for a people-centered public realm in cities across the globe. Since 2005, he became the founder and executive director of 8 to 80 Cities, cities for people who are ages 8 to 80, an NGO headquartered in Toronto, Canada, and it's dedicated to fostering the development of accessible, vibrant, and inclusive public spaces. More important, Penalosa's work has been a model for a multitude of cities and emerging economies where his strategy of imaginative reconception rather than rebuilding of urban places for people is actually achievable. In this role, Penalosa has consulted with cities worldwide, successfully advocating for public open spaces as an essential civic infrastructure. Penalosa represents a unique combination of on-the-ground experience in building public open spaces in very challenging fiscal and political circumstances and effective long-term advocacy for an egalitarian public realm. It is my pleasure to present Gil Penalosa.
I went running on some of the trails of this fantastic university. And when you are running on the trails, they put a lot of pressure on you. You know, they said, oh, excellent. And actually, I think that today we have had a really excellent day from everyone. I think that from the energetic Jason to a lot of these last comments on sourcing and things. And in so many ways, it's about changing minds. One of the things I like to go when I go to cities, I like to talk to children. Because the children, they don't have so much baggage and they tell you what's on their mind. For example, these kids, you know, we were doing some work on design of a park. So we gave the kids digital cameras, and then we took them on these small groups of 5, and each one with a guide, and then we went over to the park, and they were so excited, thinking of and they took photos of the things they liked, the things they didn't like. And then they went back to the classroom, and each group had a computer, and they downloaded photos, and then each one did a presentation. So I think that when we talk about public engagement, we gotta think of new ways how to engage them. And sometimes it's, oh, Gil, it's so nice that you talk to the children because they're the future. No, it's not about the future, you know. I think that if we educate the children very, very well, what happens? They go home, and then they educate their parents. If you're going to talk to parents about sidewalks, and you say, oh, you know, Friday, 7 p.m., we're going to talk about sidewalks, they don't show up. But if the kids go home with a homework, with a drawing on sidewalk, then they show it to the parents, and then all of a sudden, the conversation is in everybody's homes. For example, these kids, we asked them, you know, why don't you draw? How would you like your community to be when you have your parents' age and you have your children's age? And look at some of the things that these kids were doing. Anna, half of her drawing is green spaces. Edgar is 13. And he wrote that he wanted fewer cars and more people walking and more people cycling. And then he didn't write, but he drew spaces for pedestrians, for cyclists, for buses, and for cars. You know, he knows that we walk at one speed and we bike at another one. And then the cars go at another. So if we mix pedestrians and cyclists, the pedestrian is going to get injured. If we mix cyclists and cars, then the cyclist is going to get injured. And then he drew public parks and low buildings with street level activity. I know that this doesn't sound as nice here with so many designers on the room, but afterwards, a few months afterwards, I went to do a workshop in South Korea with the PhD students at the National University, and I said, hey guys, I hope that you study very, very hard, because now the 13-year-olds can summarize Urban Planning 101. And the reality is that if we did drawings like this one, we would be doing pretty good communities. And in so many ways, that is what we are trying to do. Some people might say, it's not rocket science. That's why walking is so important. It's about sustainable happiness. Happiness is something difficult to define, almost impossible to measure, but nevertheless, it's our goal in life in so many ways. So maybe what rocket science is how to move from talking to doing. And I think that was also a common theme today, that this is not a technical issue. We pretty much know what needs to be done, but how to do it. So we're going to be talking this evening about cities for people. And I really want to thank the university as well as River for having invited me to be part of the Adaptive Metropolis. And I think that it's also so nice to be with so many designers, because I think that one of the messages that I want to convey to the people doing designs is that your job doesn't end with a nice looking design. If you have that nice looking design and the politician puts it on the shelf, you haven't done anything. Then you're going to become, all of a sudden, you're going to become frustrated and resented, and then you're going to say, oh, these politicians are a bunch of idiots, they don't do anything. No. Your job is not only to do the nice design, but is to find the solutions to the problems, to find a way how to get that implemented. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about some examples on that. In so many ways, we seem to be facing a perfect storm. We got traffic congestion, and we got climate change, and we got obesity crisis, and we got economic crisis, and all of this seem like at the same time we feel a little bit overwhelmed. And if that wasn't enough, the population is growing, and we're living longer. I mean, look around the world. In less than 200 years, the population has grown from 1 to 7 billion. In the next 30 years, we're going to grow to 9.5 billion. So it's not only do we got to improve the cities that we have today around the world, but we got to create great cities for 2.5 billion people in the next 30, 40 years. It's huge. I mean, also, look at the population over 60. The population over 60 in the year 2000, it was just 665 million, and by 2050, it's going to be over 2 billion. That's also a brand new phenomenon. I mean, we're going to go from 11% to 22%, from 1 in 10 to 1 in 5. It's huge. The population over 80 is going to grow by 4, from 100 million to over 400 million. This is really, really critical, and also this is very, very, very new. What's happening in the U.S.? In the U.S., the population is going to, in the next 30, 40 years, going to grow by 130 million people. 130 million people in the next 30 years. And this is from the website of the U.S. Census. So it's not someone making up numbers, So we also are going to not only have to improve the cities that we have today in the U.S., but we got to create great cities for these 130 million people. Look at the population over 60 in the US. Especially in these 30 years, it's going to almost double from 16% to 25%. That's the baby boomers. You know, this is 2010, the baby boomers, and this is 2050. And that in itself is not good or bad. It's how we treat it in so many ways. The other day I was at a conference with 2,500 people in Minneapolis, and they were saying, oh, the tsunami. No, this is not a tsunami. Why? First, because a tsunami is always negative. The tsunami also is unpredictable. You know, it's out of an earthquake. We don't know when the earthquakes are going to happen. But this is totally predictable. We knew 20 years ago how many people were going to be in their 60s. There were the people in their 40s. Today we know how many people are going to be in their 70s. I mean, if there is anything predictable, it's population growth. So, in so many ways, we are going to have to reinvent our assumptions of old age. And we're also living longer. This is very interesting. Look, after hundreds of thousands of years, if we had been born 200 years ago, the life expectancy in the US was 39 years. So many of us would be dead by now. But not only the US, look at this. No country in the world had a life expectancy over 45. And all of a sudden, now it's more than double. And actually, no country now has a life expectancy less than 45. This is incredible. But by the way, any engineers in the room? Only one, thank you. Two. You know, because in many ways, it was thanks to the engineers and to the medical research. Because, you know, people were dying because of lack of sewage or lack of clean water. But now people are dying is because of lifestyle-related issues, obesity, heart attacks, respiratory problems. So the designers and the planners and all the citizens, the activists have so much to do. I mean, when we go from this to this, it's very clear that we have learned how to survive. But at the same time, when we see all of these issues, it's also very clear that now we got to learn how to live. That's why this symposium is so pertinent, because this symposium is about learning how to live, because this has so much to do with the built environment. I mean, let's take a look at this. It's horrible that sometimes as a health predictor, the zip codes are more than the genetic codes. I mean, I was in San Francisco about 2 years ago, and I was with the medical officer of San Mateo County, and she was saying, here's the Camino Real. If this was the Camino Real, the people living on one side are going to live 11 years more than the people living on the left side in the same county. Well, look at this. A community A, the life expectancy is 64. Community B is 90. In community A, all of a sudden, poor sidewalks, no parks, no safe public spaces. They don't have any grocery stores. So even if they wanted to buy fruits or vegetables, they couldn't buy them. 4 times as many convenience stores where they can buy a lot of garbage. For $2, they can buy all of the calories they need, but on garbage calories. Community B, nice sidewalk, great park, grocery stores, and so on. And then actually the other day I was in Australia doing a workshop, and I said, what do you think community A is and community B? And they said, community A, is it Haiti? Is it a poor country in Africa? And they said, community B, is it Denmark or Sweden? Actually, it's 8 miles away apart in Cleveland. This doesn't make any sense. I mean, we are definitely not creating cities in a proper way. This is also a lot of issues of equity, and when we talk a lot about crowdsourcing and things, these are also some of the issues that we got to think about. Because in some places, we're creating like a 2-tier system. We are creating, for example, in public spaces, some fantastic parks in the high-income neighborhoods and some horrible parks in the low-income neighborhoods, where maybe they're needed even more. I mean, the Baltimore, same thing happened. The life expectancy in the Inner Harbor is 62, in the North Side is 82. I mean, in the US rejected over 140,000 people because they were too overweight for the military. 25 million people with diabetes, 27 million people with heart disease, 68 million with hypertension. 1 in 3 deaths from cancer are either related to obesity or lack of physical activity. 85% of adults are not active even 30 minutes a day. 150 minutes a week, and 93% of the children are not active 60 minutes a day. So there are a lot of symptoms that we should be worried about. I mean, and there are other symptoms. For example, you know, just a few years ago, most people used to walk or bike to school, 4 decades ago. And now people are taking their cars to go to school. Even though the cities today are much safer than they were 40 years ago. But nevertheless, we're worried about the safety issues, you know. And many people driving to the gyms to walk on the treadmills. Other symptoms, 24-hour gyms. You know, people go in here, they pay a monthly fee. What do they do when they're inside? They go up and down the stairs. They could have gone up and down these ones for free. It's probably because the built environment is not nice. Maybe they don't have sidewalks. Maybe they don't have nice crosswalks. Maybe it's not safe, and so on. I mean, we're going to be talking about cities for all people. So you might be wondering, what is this 8 and 80 cities? Well, 8 and 80 cities, we see walk, bike, parks, and streets. But no, those are not our ends. Those are the means. Our end is how can we contribute in some way to create some vibrant cities with healthy communities, where people are going to be happier enjoying their parks and their public spaces. And actually, when I'm in any city, people always say, oh, Gil, is this intersection safe? Can I send my children walking to school? Can my grandparents walk or bike to get eggs or milk? I said, look, you don't have to be a PhD in transportation engineering. 3 simple steps. 3 simple steps. Step number 1, think of a child around 8 years old that you love, your son or daughter or grandchild or nephew or what. Once you have that child in your mind, step number 2, think of an older adult that you also like. And when these 2 people that you love, when you have them in your mind, then step number 3, would you send them across that intersection? Would you send them walking to get eggs or milk, or on their bike to go to the park? If you would, it's because it's safe enough. If you would not, it's because it's not. And we gotta do it better. I mean, what if everything that we did in our city streets and parks and sidewalks and plazas, the indicators that it had to be good for the 8 and the 80-year-olds? I mean, we would end up with good communities for everybody. I mean, we gotta stop building cities as if everybody was 30-year-old and athletic. We gotta build cities for all. And that's what we're talking about this evening. That's what the 8 and 80. So you might say, Gil, of course, the cities are for people. The cities are for all. No, not really. There are few places in our cities, very few, where we would allow an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old to wander around by themselves. And I don't know what is worse, that happens, or that we think that that's a normal part of life, that we have almost given up, where that doesn't make any sense. So this is what we're going to be talking about, cities for all people. And we're also going to be talking about these 2 concepts, sustainable mobility, walking, cycling, public transit, and new car use, and public spaces, parks, streets, and sidewalks. So these are the themes of the evening. So, going back a little bit to the population. A good news is that the population growth is now decreasing. This is something very important for everyone, because we are at a historic moment. This is a fantastic opportunity that people have not had it 1,000 years ago, and they might not have it for the next 1,000 years. It's taking place in the next 40. The population in the last 40 years around the world, it increased by about 3 billion. It was 3 billion and it went to 6. It doubled. It increased by 100%. But we see that now the rate of growth is lowering, so that's a good news. But nevertheless, since the population was already growing, it takes some time to decrease. So now it's not going to increase in the next 40 by 100%. So it's not going to go from 6 to 12. No, it's going to go from 6 to 9. So it's going to grow another 3 billion. But it's leveling off. So this is something that is very, very important. And in the US, we just said a little while ago that we're going to grow by 130 million. Well, we're going to need 50 million new homes in the next 30 years. 50 million. Where are we going to grow? Where are we going to build them? How are the cities going to grow? Are they going to be within walking distance to the parks and the public transit and the schools? And I mean, we don't have too much time to think. I mean, we don't even have time to think. We got to do. Thank God, like a lot of the speakers have said today, it's not a technical issue. The solutions are there. But we need to implement. I mean, if we blink, there is a new neighborhood by the time we blink. So really, we need to do. I mean, how much is 50 million homes? That is like the equivalent of Canada, England, Switzerland, Chile, and Denmark all together. So that's the amount of homes that the US is going to be building in the next 30 years. It's huge. So in many ways, it's a huge challenge, but also it's a fantastic opportunity. And being here at the University of Berkeley, I think is great, this opportunity, because it's a historic opportunity in so many ways, because we're going to impact the lives of hundreds of millions of people. Whatever we do or don't do is going to be there for hundreds of years. And that's how people are going to live. Well done. Let me tell you, I'm advising the government of Mexico. In the last 30 years, the top 93 cities in Mexico doubled the population. That in itself is not good or bad. If you got here 300 people and now we're going to have 600 in the same room, it's okay. Or maybe we go from 300 to 600 and we double the room. The problem is that in Mexico, they doubled the population, but the footprint increased by 8.5 times. How are you going to bring water and sewage and schools and roads and transit and everything to 8.5 times the size? And in the next 10 years, they're building homes for 30 million Mexicans, 1 million homes per year, 10 million homes. So how are you going to do it? So that's why this is so important. So it's not only an opportunity, but it's an enormous responsibility that we have with many future generations. So I think it's very timely to have this symposium. I mean, over the last 80 years, we've been building cities for over 8,000 years. But it's been only in the last 80 that we have been building thinking more on the car mobility than on people's happiness. And those two concepts are incompatible. I mean, cities for people is not just a matter of engineering or finances. It's more about people. It's about how do we want to live? How do we want to live? Once we decide how do we want to live, a lot of the other decisions are easy. So we got to recreate the cities. The cities, we have been created them. Now we, in many ways, got to recreate them. And there are some ingredients. It's almost as if we set up a restaurant and we're going to do some pasta. We boil water, we put on the pasta with nothing on it. It's just spiceless pasta. People don't like spiceless pasta. So then we either got to have nice ingredients or people are going to go somewhere else. So in many ways, we get the nice ingredients and we do a nice pasta. And then all of this is much better. Same thing happened with the cities. People don't like to live in spiceless cities. People move somewhere else if it's a spiceless city. So what are some of the ingredients for a city for people? The most important is pedestrians, people walking. That's how we were built. That was how we were created. We were created as pedestrians. When we walk, we use all our senses. We see the children playing. I mean, we hear the birds singing. We go in front of a coffee shop and we smell the aroma. One of our happiest days when we have a baby and all of a sudden the baby for a few months has been just crawling, looking at the floor, and the baby stands up. We get on the telephone and we call everybody. Sebastian walked. Sebastian walked. And the life for that kid changes. I mean, every trip begins and ends by walking. Every trip. 2 weeks ago, I was working in Taiwan, in Kaohsiung and in Taipei, and they kept telling me, here in Kaohsiung, nobody walks. Nobody walks. And this was the Department of Transportation. They kept saying, no, don't worry about the pedestrians because here nobody walks. Everybody uses the scooters. And I kept telling them that no. Finally, I had a meeting with the mayor and all the commissioners and councilors, and I started we did a workshop. And it was very interesting, and then I was so tired of people saying that no one walks that I said, look, people walk to their bicycles. People walk to their scooters. People walk to their buses, you know. People walk to the subway. People walk to places. I mean, no one under 18 has a driver's license to drive the scooters. So, and one in five citizens of Kaohsiung are under 18. So it's a huge amount of population that you cannot just write off and say, oh, here nobody walks, you know. So pedestrians in any language, any place, they gotta be our top priority, but they have not been. This is how we have been building. This is an insult to humanity when we use the space And this is how we've been doing our cities. Clearly, we gotta change. Look at this guy. All of a sudden, he's hit, and then we say, oh, he was jaywalking. What do you want him to walk a mile to cross, and then when here? It's horrible. But let's go back to the puzzle. So the most important ingredient, walking. The second most important, cycling. I mean, cycling, I just say cycling is just a more efficient way of walking. If we're going to go half a mile, then we walk. But if we're going to go 3 miles, then we bike. But if we're going to go further away, we take public transit. But public transit, we're investing billions across the U.S. in public transit, but it will never pick us up in front of our homes and drop us off in our destination. So if the sidewalk has a lot of barriers, it has posts in the middle, people are not going to take public transit. So the public space becomes kind of the glue that links the pedestrian, the cyclist, the public transit. And if we're going to do a stop, and just the stop is fine, but if we put a public telephone, it's better. And if we put papers, even better. And then here we sell coffee, and here we have tables where people play chess, and here we have a water fountain, and so on. And then it becomes a great place. It becomes almost a destination. And then we're going to have sustainable mobility for everyone. That's why I say that walking, cycling, and transit, they got to be best friends. They have to be best friends. I'm not saying that this is the future of the car industry. But what I am saying is that the role of the car is going to be very different. It's already very different. In the last 2 years, fewer people 18 through 24 got driver's license in the US than in the last 40 years, proportionally. Fewer people purchase cars in the last 2 years. So there is a change. Many of the youth now, they rather have an iPad than a car. They'd rather go backpacking in India or in Australia or having cappuccinos in Paris than buying a cars. Of course, we're going to have electric cars, and we're going to have car share, and all of this is changing. And hydrogen, and I saw the nice buses here in Berkeley, a mix of hydrogen and electric and so on. And also, we are purchasing a lot of things through the internet, but we don't get it through the computer. So we get it delivered. So UPS and FedEx are hiring thousands of people on bicycles. Why? Because they have a big truck, and the big truck comes in the middle of the neighborhood, and then the bicycles come for the door-to-door distribution. So we are changing how we live. And then we're also finding ways to have public transit, streets with only public transit, and pedestrians. The two top priorities, walking and transit, in order to create cities for people. So that's why I say walking, cycling, and transit, they gotta be best friends in so many ways. I mean, when people say, oh, trips are too long. No, 27% of the trips are less than a mile and 41% less than 2 miles. Many of those could be done walking or cycling. And if they are longer, they could be done on public transit. Half of the trips are within 20 minutes on bike, and 1 in 3 within 20 minutes walking. So, I mean, there's many that we could be doing, and clearly in Canada and the US, we're not doing. I mean, just as an example, because this is today and tomorrow is about doing. We did a survey in Ontario, in Canada. Why is it that children are not biking to school? Only 3%, 3 out of 100. And then we found because vandalism. We said, what, vandalism? And they say, yeah, then we found that the bicycle racks are very few on the back of the school against a wall. And then we found one school where 23% of the kids are cycling. We said, how can you have 23 out of 100 when every school around you has 3? Don't you have vandalism? And they said, no. I said, how come you don't have vandalism? And they said, because our bicycle parking, we have good quantity, good quality, and good location. What is the location? In front of the principal's office. That's where we need the bicycle parking. When we go to a fast food place, the parking next to the door is for handicap. Next to it should be for bicycles. I mean, another counselor was saying, Gil, now everybody's going to take the bus because we bought these buses that are big and wide. I said, you think anyone is going to get out of their car when this is what the bus stop looks like? This is a school of 1,500 students. And so I decided to show this counselor another bus stop. And then he said, why are you showing me this? I said, maybe this is what the bus stop would look like if the decision makers use the bus service. We got to make walking and cycling and transit a better option. Otherwise, people won't use it. It's not just for environmental reasons. But let me tell you a few things when I was commissioner in Bogota. I'm not going to tell you, but I don't think Bogota is ideal. Far from ideal. It's decades behind Berkeley. But nevertheless, everywhere I go, people say, oh, we don't have money. And actually today, Benjamin was talking about the Benjamins. But Benjamin, sorry, it's not about the money. It's not about the money. Bogota has 1/8 the per capita income than Berkeley. Also, I've been on the other side. I've been on the public sector, I've been on the private sector, now I'm at the NGOs. And also, change can happen anywhere, in the developed world, in the developing world, anywhere. For example, in 6 years, we designed and built 5 metropolitan parks, 50 zone, and over 800 neighborhood parks. It's about doing. For example, here the Pope came and gave a mass for 1 million people. There was nothing. In 27 years, nothing happened. There was not a path, there were no sidewalks, no garbage, nothing. It was closed. A few trees were planted, nothing else. Why nothing happened? Because usually in the public sector, things are easier. You get rewarded for not doing, for not rocking the boat. You get rewarded for doing more of the same, but maybe a little bit better. And when you try, and I saw so many good talks today about doing, and when you start to doing, there are you're going to find some people that I call civic cadavers. What are the civic cadavers? Are people that you thought they were dead because they had not done anything for your community in the last 10 years. All of a sudden you start doing, and they wake up, they resuscitate, and they talk on behalf of the community. So it's better not to do. So in 27 years, nothing happened. But then I also learned something that maybe every person in the government should know, that the citizens are paying us every other week a salary is to get things done, not to have 20 reasons why things cannot be done. We got to become champions at finding solutions to the problems, and not at finding problems to the solutions. So one of the things that we did, we went in 3 years, after 27 years, in 3 years, we went from this to this. This is where the Pope came. We did sidewalks, and we did bikeways, and areas for people to go running, lots of these children's programs. I mean, and you gotta do, even if you don't know everything. For example, we did this place for concerts, and we were doing concerts. And if you were right here and you fainted, and it took like 20 minutes to carry you above everybody's head. But you gotta do. And then we invited Def Leppard. When we hired Def Leppard for a concert, they send their security people 2 weeks in advance. And they said, oh, this is crazy. You gotta create an evacuation corridors and a grid of evacuation. So we learned. But we gotta do. And we don't have too much time to keep thinking. We did wave pools and running. And not everything is about active recreation. It's about passive and contemplative, but uses and activities. And then when we were going to open the park, I said, should we invest money in advertisement? I said, no, let's make up. Bogota is in the equator, so we don't have seasons, but nevertheless, people dream with the summer. So I said, let's make the summer festival. And we did a summer festival, 10 days, 100 activities, 3 million people. And we did so many activities, and it was fantastic. And from then on, it was positioned as the most important recreational and cultural event in the country. And it's a park that is very well used. But let me show you something else. Bikeways. We did 280 kilometers, 174 miles in 3 years. And when the city did this 174 miles in 3 years, went from 28,000 to 350,000. And all of them physically separated from the cars. Some along the river, some along the canal, some along the streets, but separating pedestrians and cyclists. I mean, creating a grid. Sometimes I go to cities and they say, oh, here we don't have a bicycle culture. And I say, what do you mean? They say, oh, we did a bikeway and people is not using it. I said, how long is your bikeway? And they say, oh, 1 mile. If you don't connect places of origin with places of destination, it's not going to work. But in some of the places we did in Bogota, they were so poor that you wouldn't even imagine in your worst nightmare. Look at this. And how it was transformed. By the way, why do we need quality sidewalks and quality byways? Part of it is for safety, but part of it is to dignify the pedestrian. I mean, when we go see those people walking on those sidewalks with posts in the middle, with cracks, we're telling that citizen every day, you are a third-class citizen. So we need to dignify the pedestrians, and that's one of the things that we were doing with some of these. Look at the level of poverty and some of this. So, let me tell you about the ciclovia, because this is great, the ciclovia. This is like a spectacular park. Actually, when I thought of the ciclovia, I was thinking was not Central Park. I was thinking of Olmsted. I was reading, I love parks all my life, and I was reading a biography of Olmsted. And then I understood that he said, in New York in the 1850s, everybody hated everybody. the locals and the immigrants, the blacks and the white, the rich and the poor. But he said, people don't know each other. They don't live in the same buildings. Their children don't go to the same school. They go to the same restaurants. He said, we need to have people meet each other as equals. And that's one of the things that happens in places like Central Park. So I said, oh my God, this is, that Olmsted did in New York 160 years ago is so fantastic that this is what the ciclovia could do for Bogota. And that's when I started thinking about it. Actually, some of the things that I did mostly as commissioner were not part of my department initially. Ciclovia was a very tiny program with very few thousand people under the Department of Transportation, and they hated it. So I kept calling my colleague. Both of us reported to the mayor, and I called my colleague and said, look, I got to meet with you about the ciclovia. And then they wouldn't even answer my calls anymore. Until one day I asked my assistant, I said, every 5 minutes you got to call them. Finally, I got through and I went to a meeting where there were 14 transportation engineers on a table and me. And I was telling them the potential, how this could be great. And they said, look, the problem with this is that if we do it and then we have to suspend for whatever reason one Sunday, everybody's going to get upset. I almost fainted. I said, that's why we need it. I said, look, I'm going to tell you how important the streets and the public space and the cycle is for Bogota. 4 weeks from now, on 30 days from now, on a Sunday, I'm going to organize a bike ride in the city. And then I left the room, and as I was leaving their office, I was saying, oh my God, what did I get myself into? How am I going to organize a bike ride 4 weeks from now? I had been CEO of a television producing and broadcasting company, so I started calling my friends in the media, and I said, I need your help. How can we get these people? We got to promote and get people out. And 4 weeks from then, we had 50,000 people cycling. 50,000. And I called it the bicycle day. And actually, the media kept asking, oh, is this an international day? And I was thinking inside, I said, I wish there was a more romantic reason and not a bureaucratic fight. But sometimes you got to do that, whatever it takes. You got to find a way to get things done. We are paid to find solutions to the problem. Even if the mayor called both of the commissioners that evening, and he said, from now on, this program is going to move, and we're going to get all of the support. And now we have the bicycle day every year. And then we started moving on this program that was very, very small. What is it? It's very simple. Great for a time of economic crisis. You don't need to build arenas or gymnasiums. You have the streets. Open the streets to the people and close them to cars so that people can come and walk and bike and skate. Actually, we have helped a lot of cities do it. Bogota has had a lot of kids around the ciclovia. San Francisco Sunday Streets, actually this Sunday is the 5th anniversary of the San Francisco Sunday Streets. Great. And New York Summer Streets, and you got them in Portland, and you got them in El Paso, and in Mexico City, and in Guadalajara. Over 100 cities now are doing this. Except that it should be nice to do it every Sunday of the year. Not 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, but 52 Sundays of the year. Because then you get all of the health benefits. And also, it's like an exercise in social integration, because you really have the rich and the poor and the young and the old and the tall and the short and the skinny, everybody. But not everybody likes to walk or skate. So along the route, it's 75 miles. Along the road, we do aerobics and Tai Chi and yoga and cha-cha-cha. Physical activity. Everything is around physical activity, which is also why the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, now they want to do something about it. We get over 1 million people every Sunday of the year. When it's sunny, it's about 1.4 million. If it's not sunny, maybe 1 million. And now I'm dedicated to 880 cities. So 880 cities, one of the things that I love about being executive director of 880 cities is that I have the opportunity to come and meet all of you and chat and learn from each one of the people presenting and the participants and so on. Actually, in the last 6 years, I've been working in more than 130 different cities. I want to show you some of the things that I have learned in some of those. One of the things that I learned is that this guy is not a politician. And he probably doesn't work in the public sector. Why? Because the politicians and many people in the public sector don't like to take risk. But I'm going to show you some people in the public sector that are taking risks, but not the typical one. But then we also got to learn from Einstein that said we cannot solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So this is a time to be bold. I mean, if we're going to do 40 million homes in the next 30 years, If we're going to improve the city that we have today, and in addition create all of this, I mean, I know that the politicians don't like to be pioneers because the pioneers, they get shot in the back. Don't worry, there are lots of good examples around the world. We saw today some of them. So let me show you some. In New York, you know, they used to have this railroad. You know, all of a sudden, miles of railroad to the middle of Manhattan built 40 years ago. Why? Because they were going to transport chemicals. 20 years ago, they stopped doing it. So many people wanted to tear it down because the areas around there, they were deteriorating and so on. The city gets together, a designer, a planner, Amanda Burton, Commissioner of Planning, and the citizens, a key. The link between politics. I think to have success, you gotta have kind of like a tripod. One of the legs are the elected officials. One of the legs is the city staff from all departments, the planners, the transportation, public health, education. And the other one is the citizens, the activists, the media, the universities. They got together, and when they saw all of this, some people thought it was horrible. Some people saw this as an opportunity, and they created Highline Park. And all of a sudden, the city and the community invested about $240 million based on the fact that an NGO group, a conservancy type, was going to maintain it and take care of it. Link, the partnerships. This is a time to create alliances between everyone. And all of a sudden, they got this fantastic, and you know, they thought they were going to get those $240 million back in 15 years. So much new development is taking place that just with the marginal tax, instead of 15 years, it's going to take 9. In 9 years, they're getting their money back. That's what Mayor Bloomberg told a group of us a few months ago. So this is great. Let me tell you about Taipei. In Taipei, they didn't have enough parks. They built and built and built, and then they didn't have enough parks. So they moved 2,000 homes. 2,000 homes. And look at some of the things that they did, this wonderful park. A couple of weeks ago when I was there, I said, I went at night and I said, I got to come back again during the day to see what it is that is happening. Can you imagine where there were 2,000 homes and they moved them and relocated with a process of social integration? And now we see all of these grandparents and grandchildren, the 8 and the 80, lots of people on their wheelchairs. It's a great place. These are the kind, that's why I say we got to be bold. I mean, in Suwon, South Korea, we have been working with Mayor Young for the last 2 years. We have been working with Mayor Young because he wants to show the citizens what would a city look like without cars. He's thinking, okay, how can we make it safe for this family? So one of the things we're doing right now as we speak, in September of this year, one neighborhood, 30 days, 0 cars. We created the eco-mobility for these 30 days. And then, but we went and we did workshops with all of his senior staff, and we went to the neighbors, and we spoke to the people. We were thinking of the hardware, and we were thinking like this post in the middle, you know, and also the software, how do people move around, at what times, and so on. And then we set everything up, and now it's being celebrated, and many of the streets were redone and fixed, and the traffic was redirected to some other places. He's from the UN, and here's Mayor Yom, and he's from the executive director of ICLEI, and so on, the vice mayor, always including citizens, everybody. You know, most of the people with any kind of handicap, mental or physical, they are the ones that suffer the most in the public spaces. And it's great, it's taking place right now, a huge success. Here we were with the Mayor Yom at the inauguration. The citizens came out massively to support it, and you know, it's really great. So even we took over some of the streets with some typical costumes. My kids thought that this was fun. Not sure. This was the designer. It was great. And the children, I mean, we got to get all the community, the 3 years old, the 5, the 10, the 100 years old, everybody. And when you go to Suwon, you got to go through Seoul. And look at Seoul. They had a stream going through the middle of the city, and they built a street with 6 lanes. And they built a road about 40 years ago, 6 lanes. What happened? It got full. So what did they do? They built a second floor. And it got full. So then they wanted to build a 3rd story, you know, 7 miles going through the downtown. What did the mayor do? Instead of doing a 3rd floor, they took it down. They took down the second, they took down the first, they brought out the river, and they created a linear park of 7 miles through the middle of Seoul. The mayor knew that the only way to solve mobility, there is no city this size, no city the size of Berkeley, San Francisco, Oakland, is going to solve mobility through the private car. None. Thousands have tried it in the last 40, 80 years. The only way is public transit. And the only way that public transit works is if it's walkable and bikeable. So he did this, and it's now great. Of course, it wasn't easy. People were complaining. People were saying, Mayor, don't take this down because people are not going to stop for coffee. As if going at 60 miles an hour, people were going to stop for coffee. But he continued. You know, the doers don't take no for an answer. They keep finding. This guy, when he was 36, he was the CEO of Hyundai. As CEO of Hyundai, the corporation, he built the second level. In 2002, he was elected mayor of Seoul. And as mayor of Seoul, he took it down. And he was very gutsy. 3 years later, he was elected president of South Korea. And he was president until a few months ago. So tell your politicians that if they're gutsy, it might have good payoffs. Social housing in Mexico. They invited me to do work on social housing, and some people said, send me some photos. They said, oh, Gil, don't come here because look at this. This is horrible. And this is what some of the developers are doing. And I said, look, they are doing 1 million of this every year, so we might as well see if there is anything we can do. So I went to advise one of them. But first, I went to see what social housing looked like. And I saw some of these things. So I want you to show some of images from all over the world because I think a university like Berkeley has such an impact worldwide. And you have influence. And this morning we saw a lot of speakers that some are working in Kenya, some are working in Scandinavian countries. Here, look at these sidewalks with a ramp. All they are promoting the cars to go there. Here, you know, the frontage is like from here to this wall, and then for the cars. So the sidewalk looks like a roller coaster, up and down, up and down, up and down. So who's going to use it? You know, look at this woman. This other one is risking her life and her babies because no one is going to go on that. Wouldn't it be cheaper and easier to do a sidewalk perfectly flat? And the cars going in or out are the ones that have to go up and down and not the pedestrians? These tiny sidewalks, and then we put posts in the middle of the sidewalk. We build these walls for safety, but what generates safety inside is if they see him from the outside. What generates safety on the outside if they see him from the inside. Otherwise, people just jump the wall, and then they can do whatever they want inside. So even if they're going to have anything, have it as transparent as possible. So these are the kind of things. Look at these roads, the width of these roads. Actually, 2 days ago, I was in Sherbrooke in Quebec, near Montreal. They were having these kind of roads in the new developments, in the new neighborhoods. Who's going to take care of those roads that wide? And they are forcing these people to do a parking per house instead of more. I mean, I met with the owners and the board of directors, and then I started advising them about 4 years ago. And I said, look, all of your emphasis have been on the 300 square feet, 300, 400 square feet. I said, what else can you do? After 20, 30 years of working on that, I mean, you have done as much as you can on how to redistribute, how to design this. Maybe if some of you go and from Berkeley, you might also tweak it here and there. But the reality is that when you live in a 300 or 400 square foot home, you don't live there. You sleep there. You live is outside. So the sidewalk and the bikeway and the park and the connectivity with the school and with the hospital is much more important when people are, and it's not only just because they are poor. I mean, Mayor Bloomberg and Amanda Burden, they did a contest, a design contest, 275, 300 square foot condos. And last year they awarded some of the winners, and they showed what they were going to look like. And actually the same idea, when people said, but Mayor Bloomberg, why are you doing this so small? He said, many people want to come and live in New York, but they don't have the money to buy a 1,000 square foot home. So, but they are sleeping here, but their living is outside the parks and the sidewalks and the bars and the life that brings the city. But let's go back to some of the images of Mexico. These are houses that the value is between $20,000 and $45,000. And what have we done? We put free Wi-Fi everywhere. All the public spaces for free. So now we got all the young people coming out. How do you get them out of those 300 square foot? Put with free Wi-Fi. Shops within 800 yards. A lot of community activities, including taking care of the gardens and places where people can go and shop and coffee houses. A lot of this transparency, eco heaters and so on. The people walking is the priority, so even here, the cars gotta go up and down in order to slow the cars. I mean, 4 years ago, they had not built 1 inch of bikeway. 4 years ago. Now they have built 100 miles. One developer has done more bikeways than the cities of Mexico, Monterrey, and Guadalajara together. That is the 3 largest cities of the country. All of a sudden, I told them, a few months ago, a year and a half ago, I said, why don't we give out a bicycle to people that buy a house as a bonus? Sorry, 2 years ago. And now they have given away 105,000 bicycles. And this is a private developer. So, and these are some of the first generation bikeways that they did 48 hours after they heard Janet Sarikan talking about hers. This is the second generation. And now they're doing a lot of this in the middle of the neighborhoods. 5 years ago, they didn't do any housing vertical. Everything was 1 story. All of a sudden now 75% is vertical, and in some areas 90%. That's why is it so important it's vertical, because then you can have all of these swimming pools, and you can have places where people can go and have haircuts, and people have tacos and so on. So these are some of the kind of things that can happen. And then when they got this, also, I was thinking, my daughter coming back at night and it's dark and it's raining, what's going to happen? She's going to be safe because, as Jane Jacobs said, eyes on the street. Everybody's safe in these places. But let me tell you about Paris. In Paris, 7 years ago, people didn't even know what a public bicycle was. And now they got Velib. They got Velib. And all of a sudden, look at these bicycles that they did. It took a lot of guts because, like the retail, they didn't want the 2 cars to be taken out. But now they know that it's better to have 40 bikes than 2 cars. And actually, they got 1,451 stations. But it was very gutsy. The mayor, here sometimes we're going to take in North America, we're going to take 2 or 3 car parking, and the media and the TV and everybody gets involved. Here, the mayor took away 7,000 car parking. 7,000. Because, in order to set this up, he took away 3 or 4 cars, and it's 1,451 of these stations. And it was very gutsy. But now they got the Velib, and now it's being imitated all over the place. All the cities now they want to have, and they got the shops and the mechanics. They got over 150,000 rides every day. They just celebrated the 6th anniversary, and they had done as many rides as 9,500 times around the earth. Or 990 trips to the moon. That's a lot of bike rides. So, why so much emphasis on walking or cycling or transit or parks or sidewalks? Because of the benefits. We're going to have cleaner air. Walking, cycling, and transit has fewer gas emissions than any other mode. Also, we're going to have recreation for all, regardless of the ethnicity or the social or economic background. We're also going to improve mobility. And so people might say, oh, Gil, in California, everybody drives a car. No, not everybody drives a car. I mean, to begin, even in the wealthiest and most sprawled community, more than 30% of the people do not drive cars. No one under 17 drives cars. And many of the over 65 don't drive either. So it's also going to contribute to make transit better. Because how do people get to transit in Christchurch? They walk. In Chiba, Japan, they bike. It's going to make us healthier. Is this what the future looks like? I was working in McAllen and Brownsville in Texas last year. 40 out of 100 people are obese. 30 more are overweight, so 70%. We were doing community work in the neighborhoods where half of the people had diabetes in the meetings. Many people in their 20s and 30s were going blind because of diabetes. And what is the problem with obesity? The heart attacks and respiratory problems and depression and anxiety and all of these issues. And in the countries where walking or cycling is a normal part of everyday life, obesity is very low. Same thing including public transit. So if people are active for 150 minutes, 30 minutes a day, they used to say, oh, no pain, no gain, you got to do a marathon. No, now it's just 30 minutes a day. And all of a sudden, look, no wonder the head of the CDC says that physical activity is the wonder drug. So it's also good for economic activity, even for these little kids. When people walk, people bike. I mean, how much can you carry when you are walking for 2 or 3 days? So you buy local. How much can you carry when you're in a car for 2 or 3 weeks? So people go to the big box stores. and it's going to improve. Some people might tell you, some of your friends might say, oh, I don't care about the public health. I don't care about the environment. What's in it for me? What's in it? Tell them this. If they want to be millionaires, look at this. Some people in the suburban are spending 25%, in the walkable urban 9%. Ask them if they want to be millionaires. I mean, the average household income in the US is about $72,000 for everything. Half of that is for food and shelter. The other half is for clothing and education and retirement and vacations and whatever, and mobility. According to the American Automobile Association, a car is $9,100. So people with the two-car households are spending half of this money on mobility. This is if they could downsize to 1, and this is if they could downsize to 0. So you gotta ask them, when they say, what's in it for me? Well, if you wanna have education and clothing and vacation and all of this, the two-car household has $1,800, which is like $340 per week. The one-car household is gonna have $27,000, and the 0-car, $36,000. It's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, I heard that from Bill Ford, chairman of the Ford Motor Company. He said, historians 50 years from now are gonna think that Americans were nuts. They were spending between 25 and 30% of their income on mobility, on something that they use half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening, and it's 23 hours a day parked. And at the same time, they don't have money to go to dinner with their family, much less to go on vacation or something. So we gotta work on that. So in many ways, around the world, we gotta give a gift to the people. This is more about how do we want to live, and there is change ahead. Let me tell you a little bit about Copenhagen, because I do a lot of work with Gale architects. I'm what they call urban expert. I don't know what that is, on mobility and public engagement. Here we're having lunch, 23 people with Jan and Helles Holt. Here's Jeff Rissom, who spoke early this morning. And I know you're going to say, Gil, in Berkeley we're different. Gil, don't talk more about Copenhagen or New York or Bogota, because we are unique. I know you are unique. Always remember that you are absolutely unique. Just like everyone else. You are unique, but even within Berkeley, each street is unique, each corner is unique, each neighborhood is unique. This is not like on the computer that we can copy and paste. No, each one is unique. But nevertheless, we can adapt and improve. We can get ideas from one. We can see what Paris is doing and develop, and we can adapt to some cities. For example, I invited a group of Mexico here to San Francisco, and they met with Rebar. That was in October of last year. And Rebar took them to see some of these parklets. And they were so amazed with the parklets that San Francisco and Berkeley and the Bay Area is doing, that they came back to Mexico and said, oh, Gil, we got to do a foundation. We got to do parklets all over the place. This was October. In February, we created the foundation, More Spaces. And in March, we had the first parklet. Except that this was a parklet in wheels. It's a mobile parklet that takes 2 trailers. So you can move it every week and be in a different place. And now the mayor of Mexico City ordered 7 of these. And then it's really fantastic. But where did it come from? From Rebar. The idea of the parking day in 2005, now there's thousands of cities doing it, and the parklets, now New York has parklets, and LA, and everybody's doing parklets. But I know that at times we feel that we were moving at the speed of the turtle. And one of the problems is that we also say, oh, I might be slow, but I'm ahead of you. One of the things that I suggest is that you gotta be bold. If you're looking for cities that are worse than Berkeley, you're gonna find thousands of cities. You got to benchmark with the best. Or if you are Dallas or Oakland or Atlanta or whatever city, benchmark yourself with cities that are better. Then you're going to start looking like those. If you benchmark with cities that are worst, in the short term, your ego is going to be very nice. But in the long term, you're going to look like those. I know change is hard. Everywhere. In Copenhagen, when they were going to create the first pedestrian street, because also the cars were taking over in the 50s and 60s. When they were going to do the first pedestrian, people said, what, a street for people walking? We have too many cars. And the weather is horrible. It's cold in the winter, it's hot in the summer, it rains all year round. But the number one complaint, they said, walking, that's not part of our culture. That's for the Italians. Because the Italians are loud and noisy and they like to be on the street. But we are Danish, and the Danish are cold and quiet and we don't go out. Now the Danish are more Italian than the Italians. They love their pedestrian streets in the rain, in the sun, in the winter, in the summer. This is City Hall in Copenhagen. All of a sudden, they went from car invasion to people places. More than 18 of these have been turned into it. In the middle of the winter, which is much colder than the Bay Area, with snow and things, people are using all their pedestrian streets. So it's time for change in so many ways. So how do we move from talking to doing? So I'm going to end by going through an example of this. These 5 steps to move from talking to doing. Step number 1, sense of urgency. I mean, if we're going to grow by 130 million people, if we're going to build 40 million homes in the next 30 years, if that is not enough of a sense of urgency, I mean, we said we learn to survive, but we got all of these issues, so we got to learn how to live. I mean, when we create cities around the cars, all we get is more cars. And then we have to invite our friends to help us cross the street. This isn't far from reality. The streets are getting wider, the cars are going faster. So what do? We build more roads. You know, there is no city that has solved the issue of mobility through building more roads. These cars could be running on hydrogen or electric cars. There's just not enough space. So where are you going to put all of these cars? So we build more roads to solve congestion. It's as if we're trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. But if we try to create cities around people, then we're going to have healthier, happier people, but also we're going to have better quality of life. Why quality of life is so important? Because the best people, I mean, we live in an ever more globalized world, and the best people, they can live whatever they want. However you define best, can be the best musician or carpenter or designer or planner or medical doctor, whatever. So every morning we got to wake up, whether it's Berkeley or Dallas or Oakland or San Francisco, every day. How can we retain our best people? How can we attract the best people? So quality of life has become the most important tool of economic competitiveness. That's how you attract people. I mean, Twitter, they got tired of having a place because their workers didn't want to take the bus to Twitter every day, so they had to move right in the middle of San Francisco. Second, political will. We need political will. I mean, people say cities don't change. Let me tell you about Melbourne. Melbourne, even the people in their architecture, Norman, they said, an empty, useless city center. 30 years ago, it was hard. Now, Melbourne is one of the top 5 cities in the world in any ranking that you look at. And the women, if you go to Melbourne, you think you're going to bike right into Russell Crowe. And the men think they're going to bike into Elle Macpherson. No such luck. I thought I was going to bike into her, and I bike into this guy. But you always learn from people and places. They told me he's a mammal. And I said, what, a mammal? What is a mammal? And they said, he's the middle-aged man in Lycra. But that's just a myth. The reality is people bike like you or me or anybody. But look what they did. How did they change the city? Public art all over the place. Art for people at 5 miles an hour that people can go and touch and look, and lights and so on. Planting trees. Look at these streets in 1992 without any trees. And all of a sudden, how it changes. You don't want to shop in this street. You do want to go and shop and buy, and it's better for the environment and for health and for everybody. Planting trees is totally different. So all of that is very important. Look at the designers, the things that you can do. This is a laneway. There were dozens and dozens of these laneways. What were they doing? They were dark and dirty. People were using them only for things they do at 3 a.m. after coming out of the bars. And look how they were changed. With many people like you doing it. This is the opportunities that we gotta find and see. And this is how we can densify the cities in many areas and create that space for those 130 million people. But again, partnership. The government would say, why don't you set up a shop here? Why don't you set up a restaurant? Why don't you sell flowers? People say, oh, it's a laneway, I'm not sure. So the government said, I'll give you the seed money. I'll give you $50,000, set up a shop here. I know that it's riskier in the laneway than if you go to an established place. So let's assume the risk together. This is Rob Adams, who has led the process in the last 25 years. And all of a sudden taking laneways from this, and not one or two, dozens and dozens and dozens of laneways, but measure. This is one of the things that Jeff Reason was talking about, Gale Architects measuring. Look at this, cafes. How many cafes they had with tables outside? 2. And now they got 617. Not because they're in love with coffee, because they're in love with people. They go to the coffee places to look at people. No one wanted to live downtown. And look at now, everybody wants to live there. They don't need a car. They walk to places. They got nice parks and plazas and squares. Confederation Square, and so on. And even things like this, do a really nice street furniture. Why? I said, do you charge a lot of money for the street furniture? They said, no, it's not about that. They got to keep clean the area around it. And we put a lot of rules because they're using the space that belongs to all of us. So we got to set the rules. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you got to open at 7 a.m. and close at 9 p.m. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, you got to open 24 hours a day. Why? I took this photo at noon. I came back at 7 p.m., came back at midnight. So when the people are walking Thursday, Fridays, and Saturday, every block there is some kind of street furniture with lots of lights, with a person, with an alarm, with a telephone, so people feel safe. So the people that use the public spaces for food trucks or for hot dog stands or for flower shops, they got to provide a benefit more than just us giving them a permit. It's not, well, the cities are not in the business of giving out permits. It's much more valuable than giving a permit. But let me take you through the last three fast. Leadership. Leadership, I'm not just talking about world leaders. We need thousands of leaders like this. A friend, physical education teacher, she saw that each year fewer and fewer kids were walking to school. So she asked him, why are you not walking to school? Because they were afraid of the cars. So 2 years ago, when the kids went home on holidays, they came back and she was dressed up as a pylon. She shut down the parking lot. No one could come in, no cars. They set up drop-off zones half a mile away from the schools, and now the kids would have to walk the last half mile. Of course, it took a lot of gas for this physical education teacher. And then at minus 24 degrees, not the wonderful weather in the Bay Area, at minus 24, and people were walking and people were cycling. We need hundreds of leaders like Anne. So part of it is hardware, part of it is software. You need both. So, 4 doers. I'm going to go back to New York because people said in New York nothing could happen. Now we see a lot of things and we're getting used to it. No, before this administration, people said nothing could happen because of the unions and the mafias and the politicians. Actually, I thought that the only way you could see New York from the streets was to train and do the marathon. So about 6 years ago, that's what I did. But now you don't have to do it because we got these 2 women, Janet Sarikan, Commissioner of Transportation, and Amanda Burden, the Commissioner of Planning. And actually, the streets of New York were so ugly that when you took a look at any book, any architecture book, when you look at New York, they were only the skyline. You never saw the streets. The streets were very mediocre. When you took a look at a book about Paris or Barcelona or Copenhagen or Vienna, most of the photos were of the streets, not of the skyline, because the streets were beautiful. So one of the things, they started working on the cities to create world-class streets. This is what the streets used to look like, very unhealthy for everybody. Dangerous and dark, all of this, even dangerous for the hydrants. And they started working in public transit, in people, and look at the things that both Janet and Amanda have done. They go to Copenhagen 2 days up and down on a bike. They go back to New York. They see 9th Avenue, cars on both sides. They go to the New York Times. They say, we're going to make it nice for pedestrians, for cyclists, and for cars. It didn't take them 30 months. It didn't take them 30 weeks. It took them 30 days. And to go from this to this, it's not about the money. It's not about the Benjamins. It's not a technical issue. It's a political issue. 64% of the New Yorkers now say are in favor of the bikeways. Not 100%. Change is hard. Change doesn't happen by consensus. Broadway, these are the bike lanes. Who uses bike lanes? The cars and the kamikazes. They need to be physically separated. Why these gallons? Because you got to find solutions to the problems. When Janet and Amanda started doing this, people said, oh, Janet, you got to do an environmental assessment. She said, what? She said, let me see. She's not a lawyer, but she read through the document. She saw one line. If you do a pilot project, you don't need to do an environmental assessment first. You can do it at the same time. So she had like 140 pilot projects at the same time. This was a pilot project. But one of the things Janet was telling me is that it was also really good with the community, because if this business doesn't like this, she says, let's do a pilot for 2 years. If it doesn't work, okay, we turn back to the cars. So people are much more open to change when it's a pilot project. And then they make it permanent. These are the kind of things that she was doing. Look at this one. And look at these crosswalks. And here in the Bay Area, you can, with your fantastic weather, you can do so much better than this. I mean, the summer streets, this was like the ciclovia. What did they do? Janet and Amanda got on a plane on a Friday night. They went to Bogota. They saw the ciclovia on a Sunday. They went back to New York. And look at the things. Park Avenue, not just any street, Park Avenue. And they were decorating bikes and painting and things. So it's really great. Wonderful women, pedestrian places, So when you designers, when you go to this place and say, why don't we get rid of the cars? People say, oh, this woman is crazy, but let her do it because it's just for 1 year. And then she comes in with the paint and the umbrellas and the chairs and so on. And they're transforming the city. The city bike started 3 months ago. From where? From Paris. All of a sudden, look how it's been increasing just in the first 3 months. It's something that is fantastic. I think it's going to be the most successful city bike in the world. And now it's becoming fashionable. All the actors and models and actresses and everybody. Times Square, we saw this morning. They didn't take away 1 lane or 2 lanes. They took all of it. Who would have thought? I mean, you got to be bold. If 6 years ago you would have told anyone in New York that Times Square was going to be pedestrian, they would have thought you were crazy. Well, they made it pedestrian. So these are the kind of things that bold people do. No wonder that Janet and Amanda now, they're not so worried about the skyline because now actually this was a week from today. There was a TED Talk and she was saying pedestrian injuries down 35%, travel times improved 17%. No wonder she's so happy showing how it was before and how it is now. Areas for walking, cycling, cars, BRTs. So now she even has people doing yoga where there were cars. Where there were cars, now we got yogis. Wonderful. So we need hundreds of Janets, and we need also Amanda Burdens everywhere. So the last point is public engagement. We got to get the citizens. People can no longer be spectators. The citizens have to participate. For example, we're working with the Minister of Health in Canada in underperforming parks and public places. You know, because we find that in many ways, the cities find the millions to do the park, the plaza, the square, but then they don't find the thousands to make it work, to do the movie night, to do the Busker Festival, to do the Christmas activity, and so on. So this is something that is really great. I mean, when you ask the community comes with hundreds of ideas. Go with a blank canvas and ask them. First, find out what is that the community wants. The community knows the what. Then, as designers, you know the how and the where. And you come with the others. For example, at minus 35 degrees, we met with these people in Sudbury, and they said, oh, Gil, you know, we asked them for impatiens and for orchids. What are the impatiens? Low cost, low risk, high visibility. Things like Jason was doing, low cost, low risk, high visibility. One woman said, Gil, when I'm walking home, the sidewalk is very dark. I said, yeah, but putting lights on the sidewalk is not low cost. She said, it's very low cost, because when I'm walking home, the sidewalk is very dark, but the street is very well lit. And the streets don't need lights because the cars already have lights. All I'm asking is for someone to go up on a ladder and the light on the street, turn it 90 degrees and share it. Since then, every time that I go to cities, almost all of the streets are very well lit and almost all of the sidewalks are very dark. So when you ask the citizens, people come up with so many wonderful ideas. So this is some of the things, the 5 steps: sense of urgency, political will, leadership, doers, or public engagement. It can be more of one or more of the other according to the case. So I'm going to end just by saying, you know, what is the role of the public space? You know, someone taught me when I started helping him out in politics many years ago that a civilized city is not the one with the most highways, but it's the one where a child on a tricycle can go anywhere. Then that's one of the things that I learned from my brother, and I thought it was great. This is Barack Obama on his tricycle. I mean, we got to take care of our most vulnerable citizens. I'm going to end by something that I want you to be very activist and get involved, because we got to take care of the children, or the adults, and the poor. And from the point of view of mobility, the most vulnerable are the pedestrians, the people walking, people riding bicycles, taking public, in that order. I mean, people walking must be a priority. Just like the birds need to fly, or the whales need to swim, people need to walk. Not just to survive, but to be happy. I mean, everybody walks. The children walk. The older adults walk. You know, this mom with son and baby, or this other one, the mom and the baby. The youth in Johannesburg, they walk. I mean, people walk everywhere. You know, in Vancouver, they have walking buses to go to the schools, and we got the 30K. I mean, this is 20 miles an hour, 30K or 20 miles an hour. We got to lower the speeds everywhere. Why do we put 20 miles in front of the schools? Because it works. But do we want children to be safe only in front of the schools, or do we want them to be safe everywhere? Let's make it, you know, if you get hit by a car at 20 miles an hour, 5% probability of being killed. If you get hit at 40, it's going to be over 80%. So we got to stop this. Everywhere people live should be 20 miles or less, everywhere, except the arterials. This is something that is very, very important. You know, I keep going, people walk in Rio, people walk in Canada, people walk. Human beings were created. Oh, and cycling. But I said cycling is just a more efficient way of walking. And it's not just for the 20 to 15 spandex, it's for everybody. You know, so I want to end by saying walking and cycling is not a frivolity. Walking and cycling is not a joke. Walking and cycling is the only individual mode of mobility for most people. Walking and cycling is the only individual mode of mobility for all children and youth around the world. All of them. It doesn't matter how rich or how poor or all the children, the only individual mode of mobility is walking. So walking and cycling should be a right. Unless you think that only the people that have the age and the money and the desire to drive a car have a right to individual mobility. That's why we're talking about democracy and human rights and equality and sustainability. And everything is related to everything. When we think of building cities for people, we gotta remember 1.3 million people die in what they call car accidents that are not accidents. I put accidents quote unquote because most of them could be avoided. Those are people in cars or walking on any. 270,000 walking. Can you imagine that? 270,000 people die every year. People that are walking, like any of you or me or our children or our parents. You know, during the 3 days of this event, 2,200 people are going to be killed while they are walking in public spaces. It doesn't make a lot of sense. 7,400 each day. Just imagine for a second that 5 planes fell off yesterday and everybody was killed. 5 other planes today, 5 other planes tomorrow. It would be a gigantic crisis around the world. No one would be flying, the economies, the UN would be meeting. That's the equivalent of how many people walking are killed every day by cars. 5 planes full of people. So we really gotta change the way we design the cities. When I say that we gotta design cities for people, this is what, it's not an accident. Most of this can be avoided by lowering the speed, by not cutting the corners so that it's not 90 degrees so that the cars have to slow down. No, they cut the corners so that the cars will go faster. We didn't put enough lights on the corners. When you have a street with a small island in the middle, 59% of the accidents are eliminated. Because some people cannot have the time to walk all the way across. So people walking must be a priority. In the US, between 60,000 and 90,000 people are hit by cars every year. Why 60 and 90? Because 60,000 are reported to the police. But people estimate that at least 50% are not reported. So between 60 and 90,000 every year, 5,000 are killed in the US. So we gotta decide, are we building streets for cars or streets for people? Because we can do one or we can do the other. Are we building streets that look like car storage or streets that help create community? Are we gonna do this with gigantic parking that suck the life out of the city, or we put street life on the first floor and then parking in the second, third, and fourth? Remember, change is not unanimous. When the mayor said, should we make this pedestrian? The guy in this restaurant said, if the guys don't park in front of my restaurant, I'm going to go broke. And the guy here said, selling shirts, the same thing. But the mayor listened to everybody. Change is not unanimous. Even Times Square today, only 72% agree with it. 28% are against. Here, the same thing. The mayor listened to everybody, but the general interest must prevail over the particular. The general interest must prevail. So he made it pedestrian. You think anyone went broke? No, because 10,000 people buy more food than 93 cars. So we gotta think outside the box. I wanna invite you to think outside the box and let's create cities for all people. We gotta move from talking to doing. We gotta create alliances between the university and the public sector and the private sector and the NGOs, between the departments of transportation and planning and education and the environment and everybody. We gotta get together around this. There are some challenges, but more than challenges, we got opportunities. Great opportunities that we have a historic opportunity. What a best time to be a designer. What a best time to be a planner, to be helping create cities. It's not a financial issue. This is not a technical issue. It's a political issue. That's why we all gotta get involved with it. Everybody has to participate. So today, we have been talking about walking and cycling and public spaces. We have been talking about streets and parks and other public spaces. But tomorrow, we gotta walk the talk. So I wish you all the best as you continue to create great cities for all. Focus on the 8 and the 80-year-olds, and then it will be good for everybody from 0 to 100. Thank you very much.